Hello and welcome to the show today. I have a really special guest for you. And I know every week I say I have a special guest, but this week I really have a special guest. I am here with Colonel Chris Kolenda. And, I got to tell you, my team and I did a leadership retreat with him this year, and it was life-changing for us. And he is continuing to guide us on how we grow and develop our leadership skills. And so not only are you going to hear from someone who is really remarkable today, you're also going to hear from someone that I look up to and I tap into for my own professional growth and development. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lisa. It's a joy to be here with you.
It's great to have you. So, I'd love it if you would just start by telling our listeners a little bit about you and your professional background, because your background is pretty interesting and pretty unique. And really, I think a lot of your background lends itself exceptionally well to what you do today.
Sure, Lisa. I'd be happy to do that. When I was growing up in Omaha, Nebraska, I was a pretty skinny and awkward kid, and the more I tried to fit in, the more awkward I was, and of course that made me a target of bullies,
Mhm.
and bullied pretty badly in high school. And the reason why I bring that up is I made a commitment to myself that, first of all, I didn't ever want anybody else to ever have to feel like I did. And I felt that if I could be a leader, then I could make sure that everybody would be treated well. Nobody ever had to feel like that. And then as a thought leader, I thought I could influence other leaders to bring out the best in their people, and even the most vulnerable people in their organizations, that they would never have to feel like they were, like they were bullied or mistreated. And so I accepted an appointment to West Point and just thrived there. And then spent 24 and a half years in the military, to include a lot of time in Afghanistan
Mhm.
during that war. Probably about 4 years on the ground there. And one of those is leading an 800 paratrooper task force in northeastern Afghanistan. And what our folks did was remarkable in that they motivated a large insurgent group to stop fighting and switch sides, which I think is the only
Amazing.
time it's happened in the history of the war. And so we learned a lot about, how do you build bridges to people who see the world very differently than you do, and different language, set of beliefs, et cetera. And, when I look at today's polarization, we have
We
certain
need a lot of
ways.
bridges.
Yeah, we could do, you make a lot more progress building bridges than you do digging ditches,
Mhm.
or digging trenches. And so, um, we were very proud of that. And that led to some later opportunities to be a senior advisor to two secretaries of defense and three four-star generals. And now I have a consulting business where I advise CEOs, NFL coaches, former cabinet level secretaries, on how to create a better future for their organizations.
And so, what made you decide that you wanted to start a consulting business after having such a great career in the military?
Well, I had two once in a lifetime opportunities at the end of my military career. One was to take a very senior level Army command,
Mhm.
and which would have meant sort of more upward mobility through the hierarchy. And the other was to be the Secretary of Defense's personal representative in these talks we were having with the Taliban. This is back in 2010 to 2013. And so I thought, well, the first one would be a lot more fun. The second one, I could probably better serve if I can help bring an end, a successful end to a war. And unfortunately, those talks didn't go anywhere. Some of that was due to their side. A lot of it was due to our side. And so I resigned in 2014 just out of sheer frustration, and did some interviews with some consulting companies. I've always been interested in leadership, culture, and strategy. It's my kind of my
Mhm.
jam. And I interviewed with some consulting companies, and it's just like, I don't want to be in a big bureaucracy anymore. And so I took the Nike solution, so to speak, and just did it, set up my own business. And I was fortunate right away to get a couple of big clients,
Mhm.
which took off the financial pressure and allowed me to build this business.
That's awesome. So you talk about, helping, you don't want people to ever feel the way that you felt.
Yeah,
And I think that sometimes as leaders, we don't necessarily know how we make people feel. Like, sometimes we have blind spots.
right.
So in your experience when helping business owners with leadership, where do you start? Like, how do people learn to become good leaders? Because I feel like leadership is this thing that, you have to commit to it every day.
Right.
Every day, every conversation. It's not one of those things that, it's like riding a bike. Once you learn how, you never forget. It's very, very different. So I know in conversations with some of my clients and people, even people listening, often entrepreneurs don't think of themselves as leaders. They don't identify as leaders. You are given a leadership label when you work for a larger organization. But when you start your own business, it's like, where do people start in just really learning how to become a good leader?
Well, the great thing about leadership, kind of like life skills, is that they are infinitely upgradable. Like there is literally no limit to the quality of your leadership skills. You can just keep building them. I don't think anybody's ever cornered the market and said, you know, I am here on top. I know everything now about leadership. It never happens because the people that we encounter are so varied. The situations that we meet are so varied, and I feel sorry for CEOs and people who are leading others that they don't take the time to grow because your skills are infinitely upgradable. And so one of the places to start is, I mean, what is leadership after all? To get philosophical, when you look back to like the ancient Greeks and Romans, they had a very sharp distinction between leadership and coercion. So leaders and tyrants, leaders led by persuasion, tyrants led by force or coercion.
Mhm.
And when you look at what leadership is all about, it's really about inspiring people to contribute their best to your organization's success. And every element of that definition is really important. So it's about inspiration, not about coercion. And I don't mean rah-rah inspiration, the sort of sugar donut motivation kind of nonsense, but inspiration in the sense of setting goals, setting your vision, your values to where people voluntarily want to commit to the success of your organization. You want people contributing their best, and doing that voluntarily. So you need to know how to put them in positions to succeed and their superpowers so they can contribute their best. And then you want them to do it for a broader purpose, which is your organization's success. So that's the first place to start. And the second place I think that's equally important, excuse me, is what we talked about in terms of self-awareness out at Antietam and Gettysburg.
Mhm. So how does one become more self-aware as a leader?
So, and this is a great discussion we had, and it really helped me shape this thought leadership on self-awareness. A lot of times people make the mistakes of seeing self-awareness purely in terms of like, I am aware of myself. And for just your individual off the street, that's, maybe good enough. There's also an external component of self-awareness. So how others perceive you. And as a leader, there's a third component, which is understanding what others need from you. And so self-awareness really is like a three-circle Venn diagram. So knowing yourself, the ancient Greeks talked about know thyself. So again, this stuff goes all the way back. Know thyself. So what are your goals and aspirations? What are your strengths, your superpowers, your triggers? How do other people see you operationalizing those. Because if we're in a position where we think we're operating with sort of integrity and caring for folks, but they don't see those behaviors in us before their eyes, then they're going to come to very different conclusions about us, and the ability to cooperate diminishes
Mm-hmm.
when there is a gulf between how you see yourself, how others see you. And then finally, what do others need from you, so that you can help them be their best selves, contribute their absolute best. And so knowing what each individual needs from you to be their best is a third element of self-awareness that I think is unique to leaders and people in a position of authority.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that we often don't take that into consideration enough because every individual has different needs. I know even on my own team, there are, some people that need validation more than others. And there are some people that are more interested in their professional development than others. And so, like, really paying attention to what are the things that inspire and serve and support and help people who are doing their best work to help you. And, one of the things that I try really hard to do is I try not to react in the moment because there are times where somebody will do something and I may feel uh, triggered by it or called to react in a certain way. But I have to stop myself and say, okay, what do I believe this person's intention really was here? Is what I am seeing true or is it part of a story? Like, for me, it's like really being able to be mindful enough to think about those things before you react. And I am far from perfect at it. But when I do take a pause and I take a moment to think about those things, I find that I'm better able to connect with what those people might need in this moment so that a little mistake doesn't become a career breaking mistake.
Yeah, that's such an important point. In the So I have a nonprofit called the Saber Six Foundation that I founded
Mhm.
a year or so ago, and one of the things that we do, we have this thing called the 22-day Trigger Mastery Challenge. So for those of you
Yes.
watching, I've got the little bracelet on there, and managing those emotional triggers is
Mhm.
really a three-step process. And it's really important for leaders to do this for exactly the reasons you said. So the three steps are, first of all, to acknowledge that I'm feeling triggered,
Mhm.
or acknowledge that I'm feeling a certain emotion. So I read this email and I feel anger, or I feel, and why is it that I feel that, or anxiety. So just getting it out in the open and saying to yourself, here's the emotion I'm feeling, and here's why I'm feeling it, lowers the intensity. So you're less likely to, you never want to write an email when you're angry,
I
or,
made that mistake many years ago.
oh my goodness, yeah, we've all been there. And then the second is downshift. So downshift is creating some space between the um, the impulse, if you will, and the action. And third is reframe. So reframe the situation so that your response is constructive rather than otherwise.
Mhm.
So in the case of, somebody wrote me this message, it's created some anger in me. Well, what's this person really trying to tell me? And why am I feeling this way? Am I feeling this way because, maybe I might have let this person down, or this person feels like I let them down. Maybe it's because they don't feel like they're being heard. And so when you can reframe this in ways that your reactions are constructive, then you are not going to make those sort of career ending or relationship ending decisions. And I'm
Mhm.
indebted to Dr. Mark Golston for this formulation. We worked together on this for the Saber Six Foundation. And sadly, Mark passed away on December 31st
Oh, no.
this year. Yeah, it was absolutely heartbreaking.
That's terrible. My condolences.
Thank you.
That's really awful. Um, I think when I think about leadership and I think about business owners, I think that uh, sometimes we don't recognize the consequences of not being a good leader. And what I mean by that is when you have an employer and you are a leader inside of an organization, there is always the threat of, quote, losing your job if you
Mm,
don't perform well as a leader. And
right,
so I think that sometimes leaders in larger organizations, like leaders who are employed versus leaders who own companies, are potentially more aware of their leadership.
right,
Would you agree? Do you think that's true? Because when you own your own business, there's nobody's gonna fire you. You
right.
may have a lot of turnover, your employees may fire you by walking, but I wonder sometimes if people don't there's not there's not an identity shift of I am leading this company versus I'm a person in the company.
Yeah, part of this goes back to that third element of self-awareness, what others need from you,
Mhm.
which I think is unique to leaders. And I mean, I've worked with CEOs, I worked with senior level leaders in big organizations and small organizations. And one of the things that I find interesting is, everybody seems to recognize the importance of leadership, but often don't connect the dots in
Mhm.
terms of how their behaviors affect performance and how their behaviors affect the outcomes of the organization. For instance, a Harris poll conducted in 2022 noted that employees lose 8 hours per week due to miscommunication.
I believe that. I'm
Yeah,
surprised it's not more.
yeah, and that's the average company. So others are, of course, on either side of that. But imagine your company now, say it's 10 people or 100 people. I mean, you're losing a day of week of
Mhm.
productivity just due to miscommunication.
Mhm.
And when you add that up over the course of a year, that's what, 400 hours of lost productivity a year. Just self-inflicted.
Right.
You're shooting yourselves in the foot. Gallup says that 67% of Americans report being unengaged at work. So you've got about a 30-60 one split. So 30% are actually, if you imagine a boat, 30% are actually rowing the boat. They've got the oars in the water and they're pulling hard. Six of the 10 have their oars up. They're not rowing,
You're just
they're
not
not
doing anything.
sabotaging, you're not doing anything, they're just, or at least for most of the time, they're not doing it. They're taking, yeah, they're less than 50% of the time they're rowing a boat. And then you've got like 10%, or one person in this case, drilling a hole in the boat,
Right.
actually engaged in sabotage. And so how do you gain the buy-in of that, 60 some odd percent who's just disengaged?
Mhm.
How do you move them into the engaged? And so if you could flip those numbers where now you've got, 60+% of your people engaged and only 30% unengaged, just imagine, I mean, you're essentially doubling your performance.
Right.
And so
And you're gonna
employee
tell us how to
turnover.
do that, right?
Yeah, of course. And employee turnover is the same way. I mean, according to, I think it was a Michigan State study, employee turnover costs somewhere between 50 and 200% of an employee's annual salary. And it gets closer to 200% the higher you go and the more, I guess, the more unique the skill sets are.
Mhm.
So all of these factors are things that are just draining your revenues. And most leaders don't even see it,
Yeah.
or just haven't kind of walked the dog on the math and saying, "Oh my goodness."
Yeah.
Um,
I watched a video the other day. I forget whose video it was, but he said if everyone on your team, like if no one ever stays in your company for more than 2 years, you essentially have a brand new company every 2 years. Because if you're constantly churning and turning over your team members, you're never actually getting depth in your workforce. And therefore everybody's always in kind of startup mode, right? They're always learning.
Yeah. There's, a certain about a turnover is good.
Mm-hmm.
So about
Right.
10% is normally good. I mean, you want to get rid of the person who's drilling a hole in the bottom of the boat. The
Right. Right.
person is a better fit somewhere else.
Yes.
And getting fresh blood in is good. Some people just have, one of your top employees is going to have a once in a lifetime opportunity, and a good leader is going to want them to, it's going to support them taking it. So
Mm-hmm.
you're going to get that kind of turnover. And you're exactly right. If, let's say you're turning over 30% of your workforce every year, I mean, shoot, in a year and a half to 2 years, yeah, it's a completely new
Mm-hmm.
set.
Yeah.
And and then so you're constantly in the business of recreation and reformation
Yeah.
rather than execution and improvement.
So I was kind of serious when I asked you, how do you get those unengaged people to become more engaged? What are a couple of things that leaders can do to create more interest and engagement from a larger percentage of their team members?
So part of it is going to deal with how you treat that individual, and then part of it's about your culture.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the individual, the first thing that you want to do is figure out uh, what are their superpowers. What are their natural talents and strengths, and and then put them in a position to where they're using those natural talents and strengths. So some people, for instance, we have a thing called the PROM archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
PROM stands for pioneers, reconcilers, operators, and mavericks. And it looks at the primary ways that people contribute when they're in a natural state of flow. So you have pioneers, who are people who love to innovate, love to put technologies together, create new solutions. Mark Zuckerberg, classic example. For those
Mm-hmm.
historians out there, George Patton is a great example of a pioneer. Reconcilers are the ones that create and manage consensus, keep all the egos around the table on board. When you look at Abraham Lincoln, Dwight Eisenhower, classic reconcilers. Operators are people who get stuff done. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you give them a task, they get it done. They are organized. They can organize efforts. They coordinate. They manage. I mean, they are really, really solid. And they're the ones that are actually connecting the dots and making plans, creating plans and making them work. So George Washington was a great example of an operator. Queen Elizabeth, another operator.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of generals and leaders of big organizations are operators. And then finally is the M, which stands for Maverick. And Mavericks are people who are your big picture strategists.
Mm-hmm.
They are strategic innovators. Think Steve Jobs, Oprah Winfrey, and so those are four basic ways people contribute. And so if you have an employee who's an operator, for instance, you want to put them in charge of things, where they're getting tangible stuff done.
Right. You don't want to give them the big picture vision stuff to do because they 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 won't be good at it, or it will be really hard for them to be good at it because it's not their natural state.
Yeah, they'll burn more energy. So I mean, high functioning people can work in any of those
Mm-hmm.
different quadrants, if you will, but they're just going to burn more energy if it's not a natural fit.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of organizations will find, when they don't do this, that a lot of their top performers, who they think, oh, this person's rocking the free world, she's going to stay with us forever, suddenly says, hey, here's my 2-week notice. I am just simply burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the effect where, in this case, she had the skill to do the job, but it wasn't in line with her natural talents. And so that's what I call the burnout zone. So one of the ways is putting people in a position to succeed, and then meeting with them at least once a week, 15 minutes, once a week, one-on-ones, and talk about um, their priorities for the week, about to make sure they're in alignment, about how they're using their natural strengths. In what ways do they think they could use their natural strengths better? And then the most important question of all, what does ideal support from me look like? And over time, that builds a relationship where
Mm-hmm.
this person knows that you've got her back, and um, and you know that she's contributing her best to your success. So that's one on the individual side. On the culture side, like talk about the ABCs:
Mm-hmm.
accountability, buy-in, and clarity. And we can drill down on as many of those as you want. In terms of getting people engaged, I mean, it's got to start with clarity. People
Mm-hmm.
have to know the expectations. Um, they've got to know what you expect out of them. And I like to use the X so that Y formula. So I want you to be on time so that, use the word so that, we get these results and outcomes. Um, and it's the same way with your values. You may talk about respect or teamwork or camaraderie. So what does that mean to you? What's the so that? What's the so that? You want, people just kind of list their values and a definition of them, and then they stay on the wall and nothing ever happens. So you want to make those real to people. And so that why, so what are the results and outcomes you expect by following this value or expectation is vital.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got some tools, and we've discussed out there at Antietam and Gettysburg, the pressure gauge.
Mm-hmm.
How to identify, like, the three A's. What does acceptable look like? What does awesome look like? What does awful look like? And also, if you can tell stories or have a story about each of those values or expectations, the one that are most important to you, preferably a story featuring one of your employees who's embodied that, and then that way people can see themselves meeting this
Mm-hmm.
value or expectation.
I love that. The story about an employee who embodies the value. That's really good.
Yeah,
One of
you
the
want to take
things,
it from theory into like actual behavior.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're making me think. So one of the things that we've started doing this year is, well, we started doing it last year actually, is we do shout outs and wins in our group chat.
Right.
And because we have a virtual team, so we're not all face to face together all the time. And I try to celebrate wins, and I try to also shout out things that people have done that are really good. But what would be helpful is to actually attach the shout out to a value. So when you're shouting someone out or you're celebrating a win, if there's an opportunity to correlate it with a value that matters to the business, then that's a good place to do it as well.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
this also comes in to be very important in the hiring process.
Mm-hmm.
So you're able to identify these values, and what does right look like, what does wrong look like. And here's an example of one of our employees operationalizing these values.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see yourself
Mm-hmm.
doing this, or is this something that is just not going to appeal to you or work for you?
Mm-hmm.
And the people who aren't the right fit, the right culture fit, are going to self-select out, and that's
Mm-hmm.
good, because they're going to be a better fit elsewhere, and you're going to attract people who are more inclined to buy in to your
Mm-hmm.
values and expectations.
So, how do leaders get better clarity? Because one of the things that I have found in the work that I do, coaching and advising business owners, is a lot of business owners are mavericks, and they have a never ending supply of new ideas and shiny objects that they want to chase. And you wouldn't know anybody like that, would you, Chris? And so therefore, clarity becomes diluted because there's a new priority every day. So what advice do you have for leaders when it comes to really being able to convey clarity and I guess stay with the clarity. Because I
Right.
think there's a tendency for a lot of entrepreneurial leaders to not have clarity because they're always chasing or looking for the next thing.
Yeah, yeah. And the problem is you never execute well. You
Right.
never actually do anything. I had one client, he was on the extreme sort of pioneer side. So he loved to come up with new ideas, new innovations, and it was like a machine gun rate of fire for new ideas coming out. And so his staff had no idea what the priorities were,
Mhm.
and it was always like chasing another shiny object, and they could never get anything done, and he couldn't understand it. why this was the case. And until we said, okay, hey, you're a pioneer, this comes naturally to you, here's the effect it has on everybody else.
Mhm.
And so what we wound up doing is working together, co-creating some priorities with this staff. Like, okay, these are the top three things that we have to do and have to do well, and and then having a process where like those were in place, and we would review them every 90 days. They would update them. The other stuff, like all the good ideas, he would verbalize because he wanted somebody to track him. He didn't want to lose track of the idea, right? So he'd verbalize it, and that would create hyperactivity. So we create a parking lot
Mhm.
for those, like a not now list for all of those different ideas. And sometimes it would, after a week or two or 30 days, like, yeah, maybe that wasn't such a great idea.
Yeah, the
And other
ideas lose
times,
steam.
yeah, yeah, lose steam or overcome by events or whatever. And other times, after 90 days, all right, I think we're ready to move forward on this one. And so that would move from the not now list into the priority list. So one of the ways is just creating that kind of discipline. Another way is, again, the X so that Y formula,
Mhm.
where you want everybody to know the results and outcomes that you want to achieve. Because there are going to be times when leaders will ask people to do X. And if people don't know the so that Y, then people are going to do X. And X might not be the best thing to do. Somebody might say, actually, you know what? X sub 1 will work better. X sub 2 will actually get these results and outcomes faster and to a
Mhm.
higher standard. But if they don't know the so that Y, they won't be able to make those decisions. They won't be able to innovate, and so
Mhm.
they'll just do what they're told, nothing more, nothing less, and then you wind up always sub-optimizing.
So can you talk to me a little bit about how to build courage as a leader? Because what I have experienced is that sometimes, uh, when something seems a little bit scary, and it could just be a conversation that you need to have with a team member, it could be investing in hiring a new person, it could be investing in a new initiative, it could be, up leveling, like, speaking in front of your entire team. But how do leaders find the courage to lead better? And I know you've done some pretty scary things in your career. And so, what advice do you have for people on maybe taking the scary out of certain things so that they can do the things that need to be done versus avoid them?
Yeah, it's courage is a habit, and courage doesn't mean you're not scared. Courage means that I'm scared and I'm doing it anyway. So this is really important. And so part of this is being willing to get outside your comfort zone. So part of the habit is getting outside the comfort zone. And Alan Weiss, a mutual friend of ours, likes to talk about lobsters. And like, how big can lobsters get? Nobody really knows.
They can
And
get pretty darn big. I lived in
they
Nova
get pretty darn
Scotia.
big. Yeah. And but in order to grow, what do they have to shed their armor,
Right.
and they have to be willing to be vulnerable, to be able to be willing to put themselves in some danger I mean, not reckless danger, but willing to put themselves in a bit of danger, so that their bodies can grow and then their armor grows again.
Mm-hmm.
And then you repeat this process. And so part of this is the willingness to get outside of our comfort zone, to go into a discomfort zone,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that we don't know everything about the discomfort zone. We may need some guides or some advice through there, but getting comfortable, so to speak, going into that discomfort zone. You're still going to be scared, but you got to do it anyway, for growth. That mentality is, I think is really important. And second is getting the right support network.
Mm-hmm.
There are, I think, three kinds of people that we tend to meet in life. When I was on this 1,700-mile bicycle ride last year, I had a lot of time to think. And one of
I
those
guess.
things I thought about, was just the kind of people we meet in life. And there are three kinds of people that affect us, and they're sappers, trappers, and zappers. So sappers, as you can imagine, are people who suck the energy away from us. They're the people, they're the complainers, the gossips, the awfulizers, the catastrophizers, the trauma dumpers, and we spend any time with them, we just feel like a husk, afterwards. Like, man, I just feel totally drained. And in fact, if people listening, just pause this podcast and just write down, who are some sappers in your life that resemble that? Really.
Yeah.
The second group are trappers. So trappers are people that don't want us to grow. And it could be that they love us just the way that we are and fear that growth will undermine that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Other trappers are frenemies who would feel threatened in some way by our growth. And so you'll hear things like, "Oh, Lisa, you're making the rest of us look bad. Oh, yeah, that's way too high a risk. You'll never be able to do that. That's trapper kind of language." And so they want to prevent us from growing.
My mom, oh, child, you're just never satisfied.
Right. And so again, if listeners want to pause and just write down a couple of trappers in their life. The third group of people are zappers. Zappers are the people who give us energy. They are the people who are going to encourage us, who are willing to tell us the truth and can build our capacities. Those three elements of being a good zapper. And those are the people that you want around you. And those are the people who are going to help you navigate your way through the chaos of going for of growing and going for bigger goals. And so again, press pause, write down some of the sapper or zappers in your life, people who give you energy, and then do an inventory. Who are your inner five?
Mm-hmm.
Who are the five people you spend most time with? And are they sappers, trappers, or zappers? If most of them are sappers, or trappers, then you're not growing like you deserve. Ideally, you want to go 5 for 5 on zappers.
Yeah, no
So
kidding.
that's another way of where you deal with big things.
And I think for leaders, that's really important, Chris, because leaders tend to be business owners, and leaders tend to be the ones who take care of everyone else. And so it can be easy for you to be surrounded by sappers and trappers and not have enough zappers in your life. So, one of the things that I always encourage my clients to do is, hang around like-minded people. This is why it's important to go out to business events and do things and meet other people that are like-minded, so that you can form a network of people. Because maybe you don't have anybody in your neighborhood. Maybe you're on your friend list, you don't have any friends who are entrepreneurial, or maybe, you need to expand your network and meet more people that are zapper quality people.
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of people find themselves, I'm a zapper to everyone else, but I'm surrounded by sappers.
Yeah,
Right. And so
exactly.
you start burning out, and you've got to recognize that. It's the oxygen mask principle
Yeah.
from airplanes. Put your mask on first before you apply it to others,
Yeah.
and taking care of yourself and surrounding yourself with the right support network
Hmm.
is vital to our health and growth as
Hmm.
leaders.
I think it's important too to distinguish, there are people that you might think are zappers who for you might be a sapper. And so what I mean by that is there are people that I know that are so high energy and so big idea that when I'm around them, I actually feel drained because it's almost too much. So don't confuse a zapper with needing to be just a high energy person. It's got to be a person that gives you the energy. It's
Right.
not, sometimes those people can take all the air out of a space and
Yeah.
leave you feeling drained, even though they're good people and they're well intended. There's just too much going on and it can be draining for other people.
Yeah. 100%. So yeah, do an inventory of your inner five,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
yeah, try to go 5 for 5 on your zappers.
Yeah. Be more intentional about getting more in your life. All right. I have two final questions for you, and then we're going to wrap up. My next question is, knowing what you know today about life, if you were to go back and give your 20-year-old self advice, what would you tell that 20-year-old man?
Oh, um, well, the first thing I would say is just the conversation we had. Surround yourself with the right people. And yeah, I talk a bit about my background, and you know you um you can very easily fall into a situation where because you want to be with the in crowd, you wind up hanging with people who are bullying you or treating you badly. Because you want to be loved, you wind up hanging around with trappers who will sort of cling to you, and so not having that kind of framework, um I wasn't intentional about who I surrounded myself with.
Mm.
And that has an effect. And and of course, so one piece of advice would be that surround yourself with the right folks. The other piece of advice would be, or I guess I'd offer, I guess, three. The second piece of advice would be, um, you know, don't be afraid to to reach for that highest star.
Mm.
Don't be afraid to go after your goals, and do so with with the right I call it P3A. uh, having a clear sense of purpose,
Mhm.
what you're trying to achieve, priorities, so the priorities that'll help you achieve those, the right people around you, and accountability. And then number four, or number three, excuse me, is pay it forward. We get a lot of people in our lives. I've been blessed with so many people in my life who have been zappers, and just really helped me be the kind of person that I am. Helped me show what kind of person I could be. And uh, these people, they never ask for you to pay it back. What they want you to do is pay it forward.
Mhm.
And so uh, I find that absolutely vital. And that's how we as leaders make the world a better place.
It's great, great, great advice. My last question for you is, what is the best piece of advice someone has ever given you?
There have been a few. One of them was, and this is from Michelle Flournoy, who's one of my mentors, and she was the Undersecretary of Defense in the Pentagon. I worked for her, And one of her career advice was choose your boss.
Mhm.
As often as you can, choose your boss, because a good boss that respects you, you have a good relationship, is going to put you in a position to succeed.
Mhm.
A somebody engaged in toxic behavior, it might be the best job in the world, but if your boss is engaged in toxic behavior, it's going to be an absolutely miserable experience.
Mhm.
Um, so so uh, so choose your boss. And a second one that I chuckle about, I think is also important, is, it's a short walk from the penthouse to the outhouse. And so don't rest on your laurels.
Mhm.
Don't get too cocky. And um, because it is that short walk. And so you can reduce the likelihood of that walk, having to make that walk, by treating people around you well, helping them contribute their best, gaining their buy-in, and creating a joyful work environment.
I love it. I love the choose your boss one. And I think that there's a good metaphor in that too. You can choose your boss, you can choose your mentor, you can choose a lot of people that influence you in life. I know that I encourage my niece, because she's just starting out in her business, to choose mentors that she wants to follow and learn everything she can from them online. I mean,
Right.
there's so much information, videos and podcasts and blog content and books that people can access with very, very, very little to no investment. And even though those people don't know they're mentoring you, they can be mentoring you. And so if you're missing mentorship in your life and you don't have the best boss, but your options of switching jobs right now are not the greatest, look around and see who else can be a positive influence in your life.
Yeah, 100%. It's like looking for those zappers. I mean,
Yeah.
another lesson from this bike ride is, you can't change the wind, but you can
Hmm.
adjust your silhouette, or you can adjust your sails. And
Yeah.
so that's a great example of, all right, I'm in this predicament. I don't have the
Hmm.
greatest boss. I can't, in this case,
Hmm.
I couldn't choose that boss, but I can choose I can choose how I react to that, and I can choose who I surround myself with.
Yeah. It's interesting. Cass Bald, who is a team manager on my team, uh, when she was newly promoted, she reported into someone else on our team. And she came to me, and when we offered her that position, and she said, I'm willing to do this on one condition. I want a 1 hour one-on-one every month with you, because I want you to help me with my professional development. And so sometimes you have to be brave enough to ask for what you want too. And it's not because she had a quote bad boss. It was that I'm a zapper for her. So she
Right.
wanted more from the opportunity to spend time with me. And I think that anytime somebody in your organization comes to you and says that, most leaders are going to say yes, because we
100%.
want to support people who want to grow and learn and be invested in.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Cass is a great example of that.
Mhm.
And so are you, because you're going to spend, of course, you say, of course, I'm going to spend that time with you.
Mhm.
Um, and a good leader will support somebody who wants to grow.
Yeah.
And so if you want to grow in your organization, talk to your boss,
Yeah.
about your plans. If you have certain boundaries that are really important to you, Michelle Flournoy, again, one of my mentors, she when she agreed to take the job as undersecretary, she said to the secretary, I'll do this. I would like your support on between 6 and 8 o'clock in the evening, or whatever it was. Um, I mean, of course, if it's an emergency, um, then, like, please call me. If it's not, um, I would appreciate it if those evening calls came after 8 p.m.
Yeah.
And he was like, of course. but it never would have happened if she hadn't asked.
Hmm.
One of the most, I guess, one of the most powerful people in the world at that time, and she made that request, and he, of course, agreed with it because he also understood the importance of boundaries
Hmm.
and of priorities.
Hmm. Well, great conversation, Chris. Thank you so much for everything you've shared. Thank you for helping us to shape our own leadership team. I know that, and I look back at who we were a year ago and who we are today, and we're not the same. And I love that we are all committed to continuing to grow our leadership and to, really shift and create a great culture. And I see signs of it working every day amongst our team. And so I'm really grateful to you for your wisdom and what you do because your impact has trickled down into our organization.
Well, you and your team are an absolute joy to work with, Lisa, and I appreciate you having me on your program.
Yeah, thanks so much. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. I will make sure that all of the links and things that you need to find Chris are in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, as always, I would love to see a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform to let me know. Thank you all, and I will talk to you on the next show.